We have presented our recommendations, the F20 recommendations to the Sherpas, and the first respondent of one of the foundations within the network is the executive director of the Growald family fund, Joanna. You've been there for the last 13 years. You've driven the development both of the foundation, but also, of course, of the issues at hand that you're fighting for. So maybe you give us a feedback and an outlook, on the recommendations, but maybe also on your own outlook, like where you could actually sort of action or you know, we said the recommendations need to be actionable. Like, what part of the action can you actually take?
Thank you very much, and thanks to the F20 community for this opportunity to speak. My name's Joanna Messing. I'm the executive director of the Growald Family Fund, a venture philanthropy fund catalyzing efforts towards the rapid transition to a clean energy future. We believe that transforming the electricity sector to clean energy is the single greatest opportunity to address climate change. Not only is electricity one of the largest sources of emissions, but it's key to decarbonizing other sectors. When we look at transport, buildings, even industry, the tagline is #electrify-everything. That rests on clean electricity, or we're only switching emissions from one sector to another. Generating clean electricity is also critical for human health due to the significant air and water pollution caused by fossil fuels, impacts disproportionately borne by already marginalized communities. I'm heartened to see the progress we've made over the last 10 years, but we're not moving fast enough. This can no longer be a transition. It actually has to be a transformation, with the OECD transforming our electricity sectors out of coal into clean by 2030, and the rest of the world by 2040 if we are to meet climate targets. As we recover from the COVID pandemic, we have the opportunity to do better, leapfrogging and investing in clean energy solutions that can provide jobs and economic benefits, as well as clean air and water. I recognize that this is not an easy road ahead, with serious development challenges for the poorest and most vulnerable countries. But it's possible with international collaboration. At Growald, we believe that philanthropy plays a key role in catalyzing this transformation. There are opportunities to test and pilot and de-risk new approaches, to support new leaders and voices, particularly from the Global South, and to convene key actors across sectors and geographies. As the G20 considers how to advance resilience and recovery in response to both the COVID crisis and the climate emergency, I offer 3 thoughts. First, align finance with the transition in material ways, such as using subsidies for clean energy, not fossil fuels, key not only for climate, but because of the stranded asset risk to our economies. Second, consider collaborative ways to help debt-distressed countries recover from the COVID crisis and economic recession in ways that center climate resiliency and decarbonization rather than fossil fuel development. And third, given the stress that healthcare systems and economies are facing, it's critical that countries' recovery and stimulus plans address air and water pollution caused by fossil fuels, linking to a range of SDG goals. Philanthropy can support all of these areas by supporting analysis and research, supporting strategic convenings, as well as supporting civil society organizations to ensure citizens' voices are represented. I appreciate the opportunity to represent the F20 community and welcome the opportunity to partner with the G20 community to transform our global energy systems and steward a green recovery at this defining moment for our world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, probably getting up relatively early, Joanna, to be with us here mid-European time, lunchtime, probably means that on the other side of the Atlantic, you're probably 6, 7 o'clock. So wonderful. Klaus, do you want to respond at the moment?
Yes, yeah. Very shortly. Joanna, great to have you with us. And we have not to speak about the president just now, We will speak about the president after the 3rd of November. But perhaps you can stress a little bit more on what's really positively happening in the United States, because it's very important for all of us to see we are not left alone with the climate problems and so, because one person is not willing, but many others are really willing, and also many foundations in the United States are really willing to move forward.
Thanks. Well, this is not an easy conversation to have, but what I would say is exactly as you mentioned, there are 3 sectors in the United States. There's the government, there's the business sector, and there's civil society. And what we're seeing is that the people are overwhelmingly in favor of clean energy, and we're also seeing that at the state level, transitions continue to happen. More and more clean energy is being built, coal plants are being retired, and the energy of the youth, in particular, on climate solutions and seeing climate solutions and the climate issue as part of an intersectional effort related to racial and social justice as well is progress and a conversation that continues to gain momentum. So I would say that the people of the United States are still with us.
Wonderful. Can I just ask you a very quick question, very quick answer? You've been mentioning the point of we have to have a proper transition and that fast. Where do you think is the best lever? Like, for example, the UN already has had this Clean Energy for All initiative for quite a number of years. So how can we speed up something that was already sort of built up in the past?
Well, I think that we've reached the point where we need to be looking at things both at countries where there isn't one silver bullet. In each country, we have to examine what are the barriers to a clean energy transformation, whether they're financial or technical or political. Again, often what we're seeing is that the technology and the finances have changed dramatically, but are not necessarily getting represented yet in the investment and policy decisions. So I think supporting think tanks and universities and efforts at a national level are key, and cooperation internationally to ensure that lessons are spread as quickly as possible. And foundations can definitely play a role in supporting analysis on that. I do think that convening of actors, including what was mentioned earlier in terms of corporations and the incredibly important role that corporations play in driving not only policy, but also material action on the ground in decisions that are being made and investments as well. The finance sector is critical also, as was mentioned previously.
Lovely, thank you very much. I just want to reiterate that sometimes when one looks at the headlines, it seems that businesses, once they're convinced, can actually act very fast, and therefore a good transmission mechanism. Thank you so much. And I'd like to invite Keith Porter, President and CEO of the Stanley Center for Peace and Security, to share his thoughts both on the recommendations and also on the actionability of them. Keith. Hi there. I think you need to unmute yourself, please. Yes.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Conny and Klaus, thank you both so much. You're both, you're doing a wonderful job. Thank you for guiding us through the last few days.
Oh, it means that you've actually been watching, huh?
I have. Every minute. I love it. So all right. Well, thank you, and thank you, everyone. You know, earlier this summer, Darren Walker, the head of the Ford Foundation, told a story that I have not been able to stop thinking about. As you know, the Ford Foundation is one of the largest philanthropic institutions in the world, with assets of $14 billion US. He said that last winter, before the pandemic, before the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police officers, Walker was at a black tie gala event with the wealthiest philanthropists in New York. And as he looked around the ballroom and listened to the remarks, he said, quote, "I had the ominous sense that we were eating lobster on the Titanic." Eating lobster on the Titanic. That image of enjoying elite luxuries while the very vessel we are riding is sinking into the abyss is hard to shake. We are here representing foundations and philanthropy from around the world. Together, we have enormous assets. We have all acknowledged that the world is in critically dangerous shape, and we are here asking the G20, the most powerful economies in the world, to make drastic changes to their behaviors, priorities, and their financial systems. Are we, the members of the F20, willing to bring our own organizations into alignment with the changes we are demanding from the G20 and other institutions? We are demanding that the G20 dramatically remake the global economy by ending all use of fossil fuels and committing to a zero carbon emission future. We are demanding that they rebuild from the current crisis in revolutionary new ways. And we are demanding them to do all this in a just and humane fashion that respects the dignity and health of all the people who will be impacted by these deep structural changes. Are we, the members of the F20, willing to become living examples of the kind of change we seek in the world? We are asking leaders for a just transition. Are we focused on justice in our own operations, or do we give ourselves a pass because we have good intentions? If we're asking for fundamental change in the world, we should also expect fundamental change in the way we do philanthropy in the United States and around the world. So what kind of change can we make in our organizations in order to prove to the world that we mean what we say in all of these demands we are making? First, I want to talk about a couple of easy steps, and then I want to talk about more radical steps. The first is to look at our own operations. How green are we? With little air travel, I'm sure our carbon footprints have shrunk. Can we keep it that way? Are we treating our staff in a just manner? Are we paying a living wage? Are we providing the needed benefits? Are we genuinely concerned about their health and wellness? Are we being hypocritical in our endowment investments? Of course, we can get out of fossil fuel stocks. Those are sinking anyway. But are we investing in companies that pay living wages, that have pay equity, that respect diversity and inclusion? Are we investing in companies that disavow the use of prison labor and profiteering from the incarceration industry? Are we investing for impact? Changing these practices is necessary, but insufficient to the challenge of the moment. I mean, really, deciding to green up our operations, apply morality to our investments, and treat our own staff better are not only low-hanging fruit, they are things we should have been doing long before the current crisis. So what else? What more can we do? I think we need to change our usual way of grant making. We need to lower the bureaucratic threshold for those who need our help. We need to fund more overhead, general operations, and capacity building to give grantees a fighting chance. We also need to spend more. In the United States, a grant-making foundation is only required to grant 5% of their funds every year. They get to hold on to the other 95% every year. Why? Many people are looking at the simultaneous climate, pandemic, and racial injustice crises and asking, if we can't give away the money now, what exactly are we waiting for? There are other ways to be even more creative, more radical about giving away more money. Some philanthropies are actually borrowing money so they can give more money away. Earlier, I mentioned Darren Walker and the Ford Foundation. This summer, Ford issued a set of 30 and 50-year social bonds and raised over $1 billion. This will allow Ford to double the amount of money it gives away in 2020 and in 2021. And 4 other major U.S. philanthropies will also be implementing social bonds so they can give away even more money while they still continue to exist in perpetuity. Now that's bold, but there's an even more radical step philanthropies can take. Give away all the money. 3 American foundations with endowments which total more than $300 million US have committed to give all their money away over the next few years. The heads of these 3 foundations in a joint statement said, quote, "The grassroots movements fighting for health, equity, and environmental and social justice are stronger, more interconnected, more knowledgeable, and more effective at creating change than grant makers like ourselves." Now, that's an amazing statement of humility, rarely seen in elite institutions. These leaders have admonished all of us in philanthropy to do three things. First, spend every dollar on transformational change. Second, upend traditional power structures. And three, distribute resources to organizations led by Black and Indigenous people and people of color. Their ultimate goal is to dramatically reduce the need for philanthropy in our world, perhaps even end the need for philanthropy. Now that is a bold vision. Of course, complete spend downs may not be the right answer for every organization. But what other bold steps could you take? We are asking the G20 governments to do incredibly bold things. So are we willing to set the example and lead the way? Or will we spend the next few years eating lobster on the Titanic? Thank you.
It's a wonderful image that you've shared with us. One could also say that as opposed to the Titanic, we actually know that there are a couple of icebergs out there, and we are just sort of, putting blinds over our eyes to continue enjoying whatever we are enjoying at the moment. So thank you, first of all, very much, Keith, for sharing this. Also with the positive example of these three foundations that have said we need to have fast transition. Quite sure, Klaus, that you do have a remark or a question.
Well, thank you so much, Keith. That was really, again, great. We know your radical provocations since a long time. You have been with us in Hamburg already in 2017, and we had a continuous debate on these self-commitments for foundations, philanthropists themselves. And I would say we give your speech somehow on our homepage because that is not a recommendation towards the G20, but that is a recommendation towards ourselves as part of the solution, just as you mentioned. And if you agree, Keith, I think you will agree, that we bring your points to a broader audience, I think that's helpful. Not everybody will sign everything, but to move this in to the global debate and for our future debate, I think that's really necessary. Thank you so much.
And looking at the time, if we have time, we'll bring you in later on, so please stay with us. But I'm quite aware that our next speaker has a time limit for being online with us. So I'd like to welcome Sandra Breka, Board of Management of the Robert Bosch Stiftung in Germany. And Sandra, your portfolio sounds like absolutely fantastic. And some of the bits are really new to me as notions. International understanding and cooperation, wow. Active citizenship, again, wow. So, of course, and then there are the usual things, strategic partnerships and the academy. But that must sort of, the intention in putting those in your portfolio must already sort of give us an idea why and what you're doing. Please share that with us.
Well, good afternoon from Berlin, and thank you very much for this kind introduction. We are new to the circle of foundations working on issues of climate change, so we are definitely new to this circle today too. I want to thank the Foundation 20 chairs, Klaus, Milke, Her Royal Highness Princess Bessmah and Mika Ohbayashi, and the Foundation 20 platforms for organizing this important event and for the opportunity to share our thoughts with this distinguished international audience. I also want to express our gratitude to the King Khalid Foundation for their support and hospitality. As all of us, we deeply regret to miss this opportunity for personal exchange in Riyadh. Well, in the year of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, we find ourselves politically in a uniquely national moment. And if you look at the challenges that we are facing at a uniquely global moment, and this discrepancy and that tension is, I think, what moves us all. Global challenges such as climate change, inequality, or conflict are shaping our world with far-reaching consequences. And the current pandemic further exposed the vulnerabilities and shortcomings in our national and global governance systems, and the crisis of multilateralism. I mean, even the term multilateralism is not mentioned many times anymore because people feel that it's not politically correct. Solutions to the challenges of our time require strong national measures, a globally coordinated response, and international solidarity. Their global impact, urgency, and limited resources require holistic approaches and joint action, and, as my predecessors today said, a lot of political will, which is probably most important. The G20 have both the responsibility and the capability to spearhead a global green and just recovery, making sure that their individual and collective efforts to combat the economic and social impacts of the corona pandemic are in line with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. With its substantial resources and international networks, philanthropy can and should play a decisive role, building back better with integrated solutions that enhance whole of society resilience. We're here today, all of us, because we accept this complex challenge as civil society, as funders, and not least within our own organizations, as Keith said so eloquently. The Robert Bosch Stiftung follows the legacy of its founder, the entrepreneur and philanthropist Robert Bosch. Having lived through World War I, peace and stability were of utmost concern to him. In today's world, finding common answers to global challenges, both within and between societies, is key to peaceful coexistence. And between societies also means between different societal orders, which will have to work together. As one of the major foundations in Europe, the Robert Bosch Stiftung has over 5.5 decades experience in promoting international understanding and cooperation, continuing our founders' philanthropic commitment in a contemporary form. Foundations, or any organizations for that matter, have to ask themselves, how do we have to change in order to be relevant, to be intelligent in our contributions to finding solutions, and to have an impact? Our own work, and that's where I allude to your introduction, has recently undergone a comprehensive strategic review and realignment. As all transformations, the process was inspiring and dynamic, yet not without trade-offs. We really decided after 5.5 decades to exit from many long-standing commitments, and I'm talking about programs which had continued for 36 years. We challenged our staff to transition to new and sometimes completely uncharted territory. Until, a few months ago, we hardly had any expertise on climate change. What started with the international portfolio in 2018 was ultimately extended to the whole organization, and we went from working in 34 issues in 5 focus areas to 10 issues in 3 focus areas, because we felt that we needed to invest our money in a more impactful way. As a result, the Foundation's international program was transformed to focus on climate change, democracy, immigration, society, inequality, migration, and peace, with a very special focus on the nexus between these issues. Climate change can only be addressed through international cooperation, and its impact reinforces existing structural inequalities. Wherever climate change encounters scarcity of resources, economic weakness, and weak political structures and institutions, it can become a risk multiplier and a driver of conflict or involuntary migration. Climate policy also poses challenges for prosperous democratic societies, as it is linked to redistribution issues and difficult political decisions, and there's where the solidarity issue comes in one more time. Addressing inequality is paramount in our climate work, supporting those who have contributed least to climate change but suffer most from its impact, ensuring that climate policy addresses inter- and intragenerational dimensions of justice and equity, and using this transformation as an opportunity to strengthen fair, democratic, and participatory societies that leave no one behind. We are the last generation that can rein in the climate and biodiversity crisis and safeguard a stable and hospitable planet for all of humanity. And the extent and speed of the global transformation required to reach the climate goals of Paris and implement the UN 2030 agenda can be daunting. Our climate work will focus on a just transition in the land sector. Land use accounts for approximately 1/4 of current greenhouse gas emissions, while terrestrial ecosystems absorb a large fraction of man-made CO2. To reach the Paris climate goals, rapid phase-out of fossil fuel use needs to be complemented by fundamental changes in land use. Protecting the world's remaining natural carbon sinks, ending deforestation and restoring forests, and shifting towards healthy, sustainable food systems is vital, both for the climate and the integrity, resilience, and productivity of ecosystems. If done right, nature-based mitigation strategies can not only sequester carbon, but also increase sustainable livelihoods in the developing world, improve water quality, reduce soil erosion, and protect human health by reducing the risk of zoonotic diseases. We therefore wholeheartedly support the F20's recommendation to the G20 to make the biodiversity, climate, and the food, water, energy, health nexus an integral part of its agenda and the COVID-19 recovery plans. The UN 2030 Agenda provides a global framework for the transition to a prosperous and equitable world for all. Sustainable and climate resilient development pathways are not only the better choice, they are our only choice. Less than 2%, and I think my colleagues on the today mentioned this already, less than 2% of philanthropic capital is currently spent on climate change. We want to encourage foundations worldwide to engage in this crucial area to move the global transition towards climate neutral, resilient societies forward. And we, as a newcomer in this area, can only testify to the fact that all new actors will be warmly welcomed and wholeheartedly included to the community of those who are already there. Foundations 20 will be an important venue for us in the future in both addressing the G20 and in building a network of foundations as partners for new solutions. Finally, acting on climate change will have to go beyond restructuring our grant-making portfolio by evaluating and adapting our own organizations. In our efforts to become more sustainable in the way we work, we supported the Association of German Foundations' recent decision to include sustainability and climate protection in the principles of good foundation practice and joined their appeal for more sustainability and climate protection. As foundations, we are well advised to use our independence, to use our ability to take risks, to challenge existing assumptions, to build bridges among stakeholders, to apply our experiences in making processes inclusive. But we also must be transparent in what we do. And we must explain to others what we do and why we do it. I'm often reminded of how intransparent and difficult to understand philanthropy actually is to the outside world. So we do have the task of explaining why we are doing what we are doing. And at least in Europe, the legitimacy question is always a big one. So it's important to be transparent. Our role is pivotal, and yet we have to acknowledge that our means are modest and that we are not essential in solving the issues. If you look at cross-border giving, I keep saying that it's really the smallest amount. I mean, the biggest amount is remittances across the world. The second largest amount is development aid, and then it's individual giving, and then somewhere after that is institutionalized philanthropy. So we have to be modest in what we can achieve. And that is also why we must reach out and help find consensus within and between societies, because it will make our argument much stronger. Here from Berlin, we are committed to enlarging the community, since we also see that in particular in Europe, many foundations should be joining. It's a very different ecosystem here than the United States, where many foundations, for example, spend a large amount of money on climate. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Sandra, and quite fascinating to see that Robert Bosch sort of, has renovated itself with a new outlook, with the outlook for the 21st century to meet the challenges there. I'm quite sure that Klaus does have a remark, a question, and of course I would like to ask about 10, but Klaus goes first.
My hello to Berlin, Sandra. It's great to have you with us. I have three short points. One is long-term experience. You mentioned that Robert Bosch Foundation is in the field a very long time and also on the international level. So your experience in this is needed, combined with the climate questions, the sustainability questions we have today on the table. But it's so helpful also with all your international people who say, oh, I am somehow with Robert Bosch Foundation. And that's a good signal, as I know from some people from India, from elsewhere, to say, yes, I have been somehow with Robert Bosch Foundation. And I think this knowledge building is absolutely important. My second point is really this transformation you went through with Robert Bosch Foundation in the last 2-3 years. It was really a challenge, I know. I've discussed with some of you and you yourself several times about this. But I think this is also for the world somehow a good example. It's possible. But in the same time, it's a must to do it and not business as usual. That can't solve the problems. That is also our message towards business. And so that is my third point. I know exactly Robert Bosch company and Robert Bosch Foundation are absolutely separated. But in the same time, there are some interlinkages. There is some helpful discussion around that helps both you as Robert Bosch Foundation and in the same time the company. And that's also a good signal when I think about Tata Trust in India. The big imperium of Tata is very important not only for India but for the world. And there is also this interlinkage between Tata Trust as a charity group and the Tata company. Perhaps you want to refer on one of these points, but I think it's so helpful to have you on board.
Thank you so much, Klaus. Yes, of course, our large community, which we built over 55 years, will be extremely useful and helpful, and we are building on that. We didn't cut off what we had done before. We are building on that legacy. Just in the future, we will be funding different issues. I think what is important in terms of institutional change is that it's difficult to build a sense of urgency within foundations sometimes. You know, if you are a foundation with a, I would say, steady income, you can continue doing whatever you do if it's not doing any harm for a long time. So it helps to look at the outside world and where the world is going and actually ask yourself, and each and every foundation, I have to say, that is a very individual beast, but what was the legacy and what did the founders or the founder mean at the time when an institution was created? We felt that taking along all of our colleagues at the foundation and creating a lot of ownership, I mean, it was a 3-year process where we invested a lot of time and a lot of money. That helped also create ownership within the foundation. And also helped our partners to understand why we are doing what we are doing. And then, of course, business is extremely important. I also think, you know, multi-stakeholder approaches must be multi-stakeholder, and we cannot afford not to talk to anybody. So it's very important to be inspired by each other, to look at the principles, and to talk to all of the stakeholders involved in this process.
Sandra, a big thank you from us for having taken the time. We know that you've got to run now, but maybe on the way out, or your thoughts inspired my thinking. Maybe one can do a shift just as much as investment has now the sort of added by impact investment, already saying, you know, we are only investing when there is an impact. Maybe one can sort of talk about impact philanthropy as well. But that's just sort of an idea. And thank you so much again for having taken the time, for sharing your ideas with us.
Thank you so much.
And talking about impact investment, maybe there's also impact divestment. Whilst we were talking here in Hamburg, in Beijing, one of the bigger investment banks said we are no longer supporting coal-driven power generation projects, and decisions like that are, of course, part and parcel of, as you, Klaus, always say, be part of the solution.
Yes, and these are the positive messages we need. Yeah.
to go out. And with that, I'd love to introduce Nyla Farooqi. She is the CEO of the Arab Foundations Forum. Again, a very important voice in the area, a very driven voice and a very driven lady, I've been told. Naila, we've had these recommendations built up throughout the last couple of days. How does that maybe fit into what you're doing? Is it actionable from your point of view, and does it fit in what you are doing anyway?
Great, thank you so much. Hi, Klaus. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to speak today on such an important topic. My name is Nyla Farooqi, and I'm the CEO of the Arab Foundations Forum, which is a membership-based association of donors and funders from the Arab region or working in the region. So on behalf of the Arab Foundations Forum, I'm grateful for the platform to represent our network and our region. So first, I'd like to speak a little to the challenges of the Arab Foundation and development sectors and the challenges that they're facing, both from a pre-COVID perspective and today in the midst of this global pandemic that remains largely uncertain and about which much remains largely unknown. If the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the Arab Foundation sector in any way, it has certainly highlighted many of the issues that already existed, but have now become far more urgent and far more dire. We're a sector that has faced several challenges in a seemingly unending array of sociopolitical and economic instances of upheaval. If you look at the Arab region just from 2011, which I use as a benchmark only in that it was a landmark moment in the region's most recent history with the Arab Spring and all that has ensued, we can point to many concerns that the sector has had and has continued to face. And COVID-19 has offered us an unprecedented opportunity to take stock of our foundations and the role that they can play, and to take stock of the role of what our philanthropy should, the role it should play in building a stronger and more effective sector, and one that supports our societies and enhances our potential. So one key challenge is with respect to the relationship between the foundation and development sectors and the governments within which we function. And that relationship has largely been fraught, and it's built on a foundation of mistrust and suspicion. And the infrastructure that's required for the sector to adequately and effectively serve its mission is largely hindered by a lack of cooperation between the sector and governments, and in many cases, honestly, a lack of genuine understanding of the sector by our governments. And while there's absolutely an onus of that responsibility that we bear as a sector on our own shoulders to facilitate that relationship, it also needs to be facilitated by those who are in power, because without them, we are rendered ineffective when we could actually be very, very helpful. We need to build healthy strategic partnerships and cooperation with government entities, but we must also be given the space to remain independent as a sector, to function in collaboration with governments rather than under governments. And Arab philanthropy is quickly having the N taken out of the NGO. And in the long term, this has consequences. An extension of the increasing restrictions that are placed on the foundation sector in the Arab region by governments are the consequent challenges that arise in the banking sector. Cross-border giving and even intra-border giving are largely thwarted across the region, with very few exceptions. So this means ultimately that much of the philanthropic capital, and there's a lot of it in the region, is largely unused or is not deployed strategically in ways that can ensure a more effective and a more successful sector. An improved, more trusting relationship between the government, private, and public sectors will consequently lead to a more trusting relationship between the public and banking sectors. And the lack of access to that much needed funding and support has an egregiously negative impact on the kind of outcomes the foundation sector can bring about. We are at a pivotal moment in our global collective experience. We need to be cognizant of the important role that we play in harnessing the opportunities we're given so we can ultimately optimize our sector's impact. But this is not a regional responsibility, it's a global one. And the foundations in the Arab region have the potential to make a positive impact on the communities that it serves. In our membership network alone, every one of our member foundations has at least one program, if not more, that focuses specifically on addressing one or more of the 17 SDGs. Broadly, and at the risk of generalization, they tend to address health, education, and urgent humanitarian relief causes. But we've seen a more concerted effort from the sector more recently to address urgent needs such as climate change, environment, and most importantly and critically, youth employment. We're a region with a youth population under the age of 25 that makes up approximately 50% of the 400 million Arabs across the region. So this represents an exceptionally critical population that remains for the most part disenfranchised and underrepresented in our sector. We have an opportunity to galvanize a critical component of our region's population and to engage youth in achieving the SDGs, and specifically the SDGs around climate and environment, because this is the world that the youth is going to inherit. And although there are hugely successful programs and philanthropy-driven initiatives that are doing that across the region, there's also a lot more to be done if we hope to create a cadre of future leaders who will contribute to our societies positively and effectively. So finally, I'll close by sharing with you a few of the recommendations from our network of Arab foundations and philanthropy actors to the G20 leaders. One, civil society organizations need to be considered full partners to governments in order to effectively contribute to their societies. This cannot be overstated. Two, the sector needs an effective business model to help support it in a COVID-impacted environment. Three, we need more credibility and investment in local CSOs and investment in practitioners. It's the more sustainable solution, it makes more sense, and it's more cost-effective. It will reduce costs, and it supports local economies when we have local programs, local practitioners, and local services. And four, in addition to innovative entrepreneurship, we want to emphasize here the significance of an enabling environment with a focus on better fiscal policies for economic development and growth, because we can't flourish, let alone start up any kind of social investment, social initiative, if our fiscal policies hinder them more than they support them. So with that, I want to thank you very much for the time that you've allowed for me to give the perspective of the Arab region at such an important event. And I look forward to hearing people's thoughts and feedback. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nyla. May I just quickly, sure. Klaus, just for once, what you actually said was ringing a bell, because I just sort of said to the lady from the Bosch Foundation, impact philanthropy, and what you demand is more or less the same. It's just that you use different words. So when you have a concept like philanthropreneurship, you also have sort of, the economic thinking, like, is what I'm doing actually bringing about the effect that I hope to do? In how far do you actually sort of see that around the region as a thought?
Well, I mean, in terms of the concept of impact philanthropy, impact investment, there's quite a lot of activity in that area, actually, in the Arab region. So we have, pockets around Jordan, in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, where the concept of impact philanthropy has become very largely driven by a youth population, interestingly, but not surprisingly, and is being supported by a lot of government projects, which is great. And, it's very encouraging, but at the same time, we're still facing a lot of restrictions in more traditional forms of philanthropy. So we're not really able as a sector to support the kind of, optimizing of the outputs of impact philanthropy, because we're not necessarily building sustainable models.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing that thought. And Klaus.
Yeah, Naila, a pleasure to discuss with you. But it's really so pity that we can't be with you and to go into more details, not only with you, but also with other partners of your grouping and other foundations in the Arabic region. I think that is the purpose also of our meetings and of our procedure of F20, to come together, to learn from each other, to find out what's really necessary and what is a learning curve in different areas. It was so open, so frank from your side to get an insight what's really difficult also in the Arabic region. We can understand a lot, to be careful, and also for our future discussions to refer on this, to speed up what is possible. And for me, this point of civil society, your 4 points at the end, I think it's really crucial. And I think there's an obligation of foundations also in other parts of the world to help those on the ground of civil society who are really in danger in specific countries, in specific situations, and under specific governments. And so to have this in mind, but that has to be done in a positive way in the same time, and perhaps you can refer on this, we must say the government, civil society is needed to get solutions. Without civil society, it's absolute impossible. And we need the whole variety, the diversity of civil society. And I think for us here in the industrialized country, it's really absolutely important to keep this contact with NGOs, with civil society in many other parts of the world. But perhaps you can refer on the point what can be done in the next future.
Well, I mean, obviously, I can only agree with you emphatically about the need for civil society and the importance of civil society. And I mean, just look at Lebanon. I don't need to say any more. Just look at what happened in Lebanon. Without a civil society sector that has some credibility, we could not have had the kind of support that flooded into Lebanon after the most recent explosions, because there is no government to support any other kind to give any other kind of support. So yeah, I mean, the critical nature of a functioning and enabled civil society is, something obvious. I don't know anyone who's going to counter that with an argument against it. But I think, for us as a region, and Klaus, I know you and I have talked so often about this, and every time that we've met, we've had the same conversation about when we talk about Arab civil society and Arab philanthropy and Arab foundations, the perspective that we're coming from is so largely different and so vastly different than the rest of the world, or at least the rest, maybe the West. Whereas, we see a lot of similarities in India, we see similarities in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, in other Southeast Asian countries where there maybe, former Eastern Bloc, where there are many of these similar challenges. But we're so focused on these challenges, and if we're able to use a platform like F20 in any way to address the leaders of, globally, but also the leaders of our governments, we would be remiss if we didn't make it very, very clear that as a sector, we are ready, poised, and able to partner and collaborate with governments if only we would be taken off of these very odd lists of being suspect and threatening. And if we understand again, and I think I mentioned that when I was speaking, there is a burden of that responsibility that falls on the shoulder of the sector as well to kind of facilitate those conversations and make clear what our intentions are. But that can only happen if on the other side, there's a willingness to sort of, not look at this sector as a threat, but to see it as a partner, Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much for that. Don't run away, because we'd now like to sort of have a conversation with all of you. And again, thank you, Keith and Joanna, for staying on the line. Of course, we had to say goodbye to Sandra because she was only available till past. And maybe, Joanna and Keith, there is something that you, having listened to the others, would like to sort of mirror or reverberate or say, this is exactly where we all need to go, never mind whether we're sort of America-based, Arab region-based, or in Asia. Joanna?
Sure, thank you. And I really appreciated hearing all of the speakers and wish to definitely follow up more. There's two things that I would highlight. First of all, on Keith's point about foundations' ambition, I couldn't agree more. If we were ever saving for a rainy day, it's pouring. So this is the time for, I think, endowments and trustees to dig into their principle. Our trustees have done that. It's a hard decision to make, but on the other hand, the the time is now. If we wait for 2030 to make investments, it's too late. So I really echo that. And also one of the other things is around taking risk in philanthropy and really knowing that though we have a tendency in philanthropy to look for very clear outcomes, to have everything well written out and determined in these chaotic times, it's important for us to be bold. I think the other point that Naila was making around collaboration with governments and the importance of seeing philanthropy as a partner is also really critical to support civil society efforts around the world.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I was interrupting there. I thought you'd come to an end. Keith, first of all, I'd like to invite you as well to reflect upon what you heard from your fellow foundation CEOs. And there's one other thing, something that Klaus mentioned earlier. You can only be as advanced as a foundation as your trustees actually allow you to be. So they're the number one who have to have the buy-in to what you do. How do you get that?
Yeah, I just want to say it's a great question. I really appreciate what Sandra Breka said about how there is no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to these things. Mm-hmm. Every philanthropic organization is different. Everyone has their own reason that they were created, the intent of the founders, the history that's transpired, the board members, the strategic planning that's gone on. I mean, it's just everyone is different. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution to what they should do. But I think what you're hearing, all of us say is that there is a need to be bold. I mean, there is a need to think differently about the way we've approached these problems in the past. And we can do it from all of the different angles that are available to us. On the investment side, for endowment-based organizations, you're making investments. I mean, that's what you've always done. How can you make those investments in a way that, first of all, is in line with your own core values and your own, mission statement? Or let me put it a different way. What many organizations are doing is trying to find ways to make sure that they're not investing things that are out of line with their mission. And that's great, and they should all do that. But there is another step, and that is to really look for investments that can add value to what you're already trying to do in your programmatic and in your grant-making work. And then I think that, what the Ford Foundation did as far as the social bonds go is really just another a leap of how you can take money, how you can take resources and leverage them in new ways. In a lot of ways, that's what philanthropies have always been about. And we're learning particularly in green finance, in green banking, that organizations with resources can really make a difference, and it doesn't take that much. So if you can take that first bit of risk, for example, for some green energy investment, go with them to the bank, agree to take on that first 10% of risk, and suddenly banks are like, oh, well, great. If you're going to take on that risk, we'll finance the rest of it. And there's little things like that, these tiny points where we can make a difference. And I feel like we just need to continue being bold in how we do that. But I also want to emphasize this whole idea about how we interact with the grantees. Now, my organization is an operating foundation, not a grant-making foundation. But for those that do make grants, there's been a real transformation in how you evaluate what grant-making, what your recipients what's expected of them, how much of a bureaucratic hurdle are you going to put them through to get a few dollars? What limits are you putting on them? When in fact, what we heard from those other American organizations that are spending down is that those grassroots organizations, the recipients of the grant money, know more than you do. They know more than you do about what the needs are and where impact can be made. And so listen to them and lower those barriers. If you want to have impact, you need to lower those barriers and trust the people you're giving the money to.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Keith. And Naila, you have the last opportunity to speak. So use your 1 minute and a half well.
No pressure. No, I mean, I think what's important in what you're hearing everyone say is that obviously we all, we're speaking on behalf of a sector that we're all so passionately involved in, and maybe from different perspectives and from different regions and whatever. But at the end of the day, I don't think any of us can undermine the importance of what this sector can do in this moment in history today. I think if this whole pandemic did something to our psyches, and, if not on a personal level, on a professional level, whatever it is, but at some point, I remember getting very frustrated at seeing people saying things like, if you haven't used this pandemic to, to learn how to become a baker, you've wasted your time, or whatever ridiculous thing you're supposed to be. And frankly, what this pandemic did for me in terms of my work is that this time last year, I would have taken 37 trips already.
Yeah.
Okay. And I took 0 trips, 0 trips. And so it forced this moment of, oh my God, what have I been doing? And what can I do? And I'm not a foundation. I'm not a grant maker. I don't give anybody money. But my members are these foundations and organizations that think and really very, very passionately think about how they can make their communities better and stronger. And so it's forced this kind of this reckoning of what is really the purpose of what it is that we're doing. And I think if none of us have taken that time or this particular time in history to sort of come out with that, what is that thing, then we've wasted our time. But I don't care if you can bake bread. That doesn't matter.
Absolutely, a rich discussion, and all I just wanted to say is we had thought that we could get the Shakti Foundation in. Something must have happened to the line. That is the drawback. If the IT doesn't work, then you don't have that person to talk with you. But I think we are quite grateful here in the studio that all of you have been with us, and I think it's up to Klaus to say the proper thank you.
Yes, a huge thank you to all of you. You were just some of the 60 foundations, more than 60 foundations of F20. Naila, you are specific with a group and many foundations behind. But I think to learn more in this session, what we ourselves as founders, foundations, representatives of foundations should change, should do. I think that was very important to show up we are part of the solution, but in the same time, we have recommendations for the G20 and to fight the COVID crisis and to combine this in the right way. And we can do a lot being bridge builders between business, civil society, finance sector, and politicians worldwide, and that can help a lot. So thank you very much, and we keep together. And it was wonderful to have you here in our studio in Hamburg. Next time we meet again and have some coffee and some beer afterwards.
Yes. And this is exactly what I would like to refer to. So thank you again. And we come now to the last part, the very last part of 4 days. Normally, you would have let the co-chairs comment on this week first. Maybe you can give us sort of a sneak preview on your last words.
Yes, and I think I can combine it with Shakti Foundation. The representative couldn't join us just now. It's a pity, but India takes over the presidency for the G20 in 2022, same year that Germany takes over the presidency for G7. And so this is a very important line we have to keep in our thoughts, in our programs. Next year, Italy is in charge with G20. And in that year, UK has to take over the G7. So I can refer on this later on. Now I see my two co-chairs on the screen.
And there they are, the ladies. And so wonderful to see Her Royal Highness Princess Bessmah bint Bada again. Bessmah, hello. We were missing you this morning, of course, not hearing your first words, as we almost gotten used to. And Mika, again, thank you very much for staying up so late. Princess Bessmah, can you please sort of give us your outlook, your summary of 4 hard-working days within the Climate Solution Week?
Thank you so much, Conny, and thank you, Klaus. And yes, it was strange not starting my day with you. So I'd like to say it's been a great honor to have been part of the 2020 F20 Solutions Week. It was truly an insightful experience to have listened and discussed our key priorities of sustainable financing, climate action, biodiversity, and food systems. It's been a fulfilling learning experience to have heard from the experts and the researchers, advocates, and from the policymakers, and uplifting to see that we all share a vision of sustainable and a just transition. As we conclude our week-long virtual event, I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to every team member and partner that made this week possible. Thanks to Klaus and Stefan and their amazing team at the Foundation 20 Secretariat. They have been a great partner to work with. Throughout the months, we have admired their dedication, their passion, and professionalism. I'd also like to extend my thanks to my team at the King Khalid Foundation that worked in tandem with our partners at the F20, especially Daria, who has been instrumental to the smooth operational handling of the event alongside our dear friend Mosca at the F20 side. I'm also grateful to our F20 network who have joined us in support through their participation today and over the past few days. Our collective voice is making a difference, and we shall continue our dedication to our shared noble cause of making the SDGs and the Paris Agreement a global reality. I'd like to especially recognize our partners from the Bmw Foundation and DBU for going the extra mile with us. It's been a true pleasure to have been able to co-host this event with your support. I would also like to thank my co-chairs who I've been honored to be working with. Thank you, Klaus, for your inclusivity. And thank you, Mika, for your leadership and hospitality in Japan last year. Finally, I'd like to express my great appreciation to the esteemed speakers and participants who have joined us this week to share their views, expertise, and innovations. It's been a true honor. Thank you all, and I'm looking forward to our next meeting when we would hopefully be able to meet in person. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much. And we're just going to play it over via Hamburg and go to Japan. Mika, as co-chair, the Climate Solutions Week, from your point of view.
Yeah, and also thank you very much. Let me start with my word with great appreciation for the organizers and also the colleagues at other foundations. It's a very honorable and great experience for me to work you together. And actually that I would like to recall that what we have done about last year. Last year's F20 event was the first time in Japan that foundation came together to formulate recommendations for the G20. At the same time, we also took the opportunity to bring together Japanese philanthropic foundations to discuss the role of philanthropists. That is climate actions. Not many people know this, but in Japan, the civil sector is not strong enough, and very little funding from foundations is provided for advocacy type of activities, such as climate change. It was significant that the F20 bring together Japanese foundations to discuss ways to strengthen the civil sector and to let them know that foundations around the world are working specifically and with strong interest in climate actions. I think that this delay in actions is a reflection of the policies of Japan as a whole. We are an organization founded by a prominent Japanese business leader, but the leadership like he has is very rare in Japanese society. Japan is a developed country and a member of the G20 and G7. I mentioned that Japanese companies more and more taking actions in vocal on climate actions, but more attention needs to be paid by Japanese philanthropies and companies. Foundation has to take some Although there is a sign of changes, but still Japan is the only country in the OECD whose government supports coal exports and is promoting the use of coal domestically. It is important to recognize Japan's responsibility global scale and to make climate action a common language for Japanese companies. Our new Prime Minister will be making his first diplomatic appearance at the UN General Assembly next week, and from now on, at G7 and G20 meetings with world leaders. Hope at those opportunities that he gets to know that the world steps taken for green recovery. Thank you very much for Klaus, Stefan, Mosca, Martin for your entire support and great contributions. And F20, thank you for your great recommendation for G20 this year. I will convey this to the Japanese government and foundations. Thank you very much for all.
Thank you, Mika, which leaves Klaus.
Thank you so much, dear Mika. Thank you so much, dear Princess Bessmah. And also a huge thank you to the whole team at King Khalid Foundation. It was really a wonderful journey together with you up to the beginning of this week and during this week. And I can promise we will continue this journey in the next weeks up to the summit of the G20 at the end of November, and moreover also in the next year and years. And I really will be happy to come over to your wonderful country, to Riyadh, to continue with our talks and to invite others by trust building what can be done more. Also in the neighborhood of Saudi Arabia, I think there is much what we can do together. Naila mentioned this in the Arabic region. And so there is really a leverage effect in front of us we should use in a good way. But that needs ownership. And ownership, it's so crucial for all what we should do and can do. And so nobody will do what we want. It must be a will, a self-commitment from these people themselves. And perhaps we can build bridges how that could be done. Thank to all who prepared these sessions. Thank you to all the speakers and contributors in the background for the speakers and so. That's very important, and it worked out perfectly. I'm so happy that we tried to do it in this virtual way. Somehow it's now my home place to be here in the studio. And it's an interesting experience with such a wonderful moderator like Conny. Conny, thank you so much. You did a tremendous job. And it enabled us to do our job in a good way. I want to link now in this very moment at the end also to our Italian friends, because after Saudi Arabia, Italy takes over the G20 presidency. And we have already contact with Italian foundations and with this wonderful network Enrico Giovannini spoke of yesterday, of more than 270 groupings in Italy. So there is a potential, an opportunity in front of us we will use. But Princess Bessmah, we do it together. We keep in contact with you and try to bring up these discussions, these debates in many different contexts around the world. And I think there is a responsibility on our side, but there's also an ability on our side. The two big words now as a headline of our recommendations. And we have to self-commit ourselves in this way. So I think it was great. It was, there are many fruits now on the table and we should use it in a good way. And I hope we keep in contact in the next future. And virtual meetings are fine, but real meetings are better. So let's see what's in front of us. Thank you again, Mika, Princess Bessmah, your whole team, Conny, Stefan, and so. And perhaps now with a camera, we can make a short move to the wonderful people here in the room.
And on that note, I'm not going to take the last words away from you, but we would like, for those of you who are still online, we would like the feedback that we've always had. And normally, during a normal conference, you'd now sort of give these feedback forms. This is very easy. Go back to the Mentimeter system that we've used throughout the conference, so you should be quite familiar with it. I'm not going to comment on it, but it would be lovely if you are actually using it, and if you could give us your feedback on that. And with that, Klaus, I think we should pick up your idea, because you might want to know that it wasn't just the 2 or 3 noses in front of the cameras, but it was a whole team behind there. And maybe everybody from the Foundation's 20 team can also come into the room, and just for once, socially distanced, we present our working team. Yes, let's have a look. This, ladies and gentlemen, was the team that we cooperated with. And again, socially distanced behind there is the organizing team. And just give us a big thumbs up, a bye-bye from everybody. We have had more than 14 hours of live broadcast, and I'm quite sure that some of it will be reverberated, it will be cut, and then everybody can see it on YouTube, but that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much, everybody. It was a great time. So
it was. Thank you so much.
The Climate Solutions Week 2020 after Foundations 20 is finished. We hope that you're doing well. Keep healthy and do the right thing.